This week, Paul and I interview Zane Lackey, Chief Security Officer at Signal Sciences. In the news, the US government weighs in on last year's Equifax breach. A supposed JavaScript update leads to a breach at British Airways, and Google is allegedly in secret dealings with MasterCard to track retail sales. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Layered Insight is the industry's first embedded security approach for containers. Trusted by Global 1000 enterprises to secure their containerized applications, it's the only solution that requires no root privileges, has zero dependency on the underlying infrastructure, and is fully portable across any container environment. Unify DevOps and SecOps, enabling the rapid development of containerized applications without worrying about security. To learn more, please visit layeredinsight.com/ASW. Rapid7 powers the practice of SecOps. Using shared data, analytics, and automated workflows, SecOps unites IT, DevOps, and security teams to make security an outcome of innovation. Rapid7 combines technology, expertise, and advocacy to drive vulnerability management, application security, incident detection, and log management for more than 7,000 organizations worldwide. Power up your SecOps practice with a free trial at rapid7.com/Security Weekly.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 31, our 32nd episode of Application Security Weekly. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet. I'm excited to be joined once again by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Hey, Keith, how's it going?
Hey, man, really good. It's, we had last week off, and Patriots played yesterday, so there was that. I got to see them on my new 4K TV, which was kind of fun.
That's exciting.
Yeah. Otherwise, things are going great. It looks like the Mid-Atlantic is bracing for another huge storm. So here's hoping we all avoid that.
Yeah,
but how about you?
Like two of our hosts said they could be here Thursday, but it all depends on how the hurricane goes. So I'm hoping it's nothing, so that we can have people here in studio. Because I think Jeff and Larry were supposed to be in studio, and travel may get interrupted.
Yeah, here's hoping they can at least, if they are going to get hit, they can make it out of there early enough so that they could enjoy, being in studio and drinking beverages rather than being, in the rain and or wind and or, flooding at home. So,
yeah, exactly.
With that, we do have at least one quick announcement right before we jump into our interview. Check out our on-demand material. Some of it has recently been recorded webcasts, which include on-demand things from, not the one with Javelin Networks, probably the one with Javelin Networks, and a number of other really cool things out there as well. So that's securityweekly.com/on-demand. Go check it out. I really enjoyed the content, and I think you will as well. So with that, we are joined today by Zane Lackey, founder and chief security officer at Signal Sciences. Prior to being at Signal Sciences, Zane was the director of security engineering at Etsy, and before that, senior security consultant at ISEC Partners. Zane, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's good to see you guys.
Likewise.
Good to see you, Zane. Nice to chat with you as always, right?
Likewise.
And I understand you just got back from Australia, so that must have been an interesting trip. Where'd you go in Australia, by the way? I know that you've been doing some traveling lately.
Yeah, I was in Sydney and Melbourne, and then had a nice short hop of Melbourne to Sydney to LA back to New York a couple days ago. So to everyone watching, if I fall asleep in the middle of this, now you know why. It's just face down on the laptop keyboard.
Around the world with Zane Lackey.
Right.
The glamorous American Airlines economy section. Let me tell you, it's incredibly glamorous.
Well, duly noted. Thankfully I'm not taking them on my trip next month, so it's a good thing. So I imagine, while you were on the plane, you probably had a lot of time to do some thinking about, life, why you were on a plane in the economy section in American Airlines, and of course the SDLC.
Exactly.
So
how'd you know?
The whole time, Zane's like, "What am I going to talk about on Application Security Weekly?" Right? That's the only thing you were thinking about.
Exactly. It was either airline jokes or the SDLC, and then I thought of my airline jokes, and none of them are good. So we'll have to go for SDLC.
Right.
So they were just too plain. Is that?
Oh. Yeah, they were headed down in flames. That's for sure.
I'm not even going to venture to try and put the wheels back on that one.
Did you did you actually want to talk about AppSec today, Keith?
What? No.
I was thinking about it, honestly.
Okay.
Plain jokes would have been great, but they probably would have been a bit stale. So, with that being said, I know that lately there's been a huge push for this idea of shifting left inside of the security development or secure development lifecycle movement, specifically with DevSecOps. And Zane, I know that you've had a lot of conversations, in and around the industry with alternative ideas to shifting left. Of course, we have to fix bugs, but there's more to it. So fill our listeners in kind of where are you going with this, right? Because everybody thinks shift left. We have to go further to the left, like as far left as possible. But you seem to have some other ideas, and I think that they're valuable. So go right ahead and jump in.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I think it's kind of augmenting the shift left move, which I totally agree with. But I think if we step back and we think about where security has been done in the software development lifecycle, it's always been done kind of in the middle, right? And there've been a lot of, applications designed and then start to be implemented. And then in the middle was where historically in the kind of waterfall model, we always tried to discover a bunch of bugs and get those fixed. And it was, really much more expensive to discover them at that point and to go back and say, actually, this design is fundamentally flawed and we need to change architecture and all of that. And so the last couple of years, you've seen folks starting to talk about, hey, we need to shift this left and shift it earlier in the kind of design and implementation phase as possible, which is totally correct. But then the other part of it becomes, hey, what are the other lessons learned out of this broader DevOps movement? And how can we apply those to security? So what actually made DevOps successful? And one of the key pieces of what made it successful was, bring those capabilities earlier, but also bring key capabilities to the development teams and DevOps teams and give them visibility and feedback into the systems that they're actually building and operating. And so I think that's kind of the other side, which you can kind of think of as like shifting right with security as well, is that we take something that was always in the middle and we say, let's bring some of this much earlier, and then let's bring some of it to the right, where how do we actually get visibility into what's going on with our live production systems? And let's get visibility and let's get feedback on that, not just to the security teams, but directly to the development teams and to the DevOps teams themselves so that they can consume it. I think there's a really strong parallel here actually to performance monitoring space. So in the past, it was very similar to security, where you had these isolated, specialized performance teams, and the development teams would ship some code over the fence to them and then get something back. But the rise of App Dynamics, New Relic, Datadog, all of these things have been because they brought this previously siloed capability and brought it directly to the development teams and DevOps teams. I think there's a huge lesson that security can learn from that.
That's actually a great analogy. It's interesting. I worked on a project with the performance team for a startup for like a brief stint, and I never thought of it like, what if you would apply the way we apply security, apply that to performance tuning? That's actually a great analogy, because like once you're like, we were testing performance as like, a month or so before they're ready to deliver, that we worked on for a year. I'm like, now I'm thinking we could have solved that problem way sooner and done it much better in the DevOps style.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Not only can we do it sooner, but if we also can give those teams into what's going on with the performance of their applications in production, they can start to own that capability.
So Zane, speaking of shifting left, this particular application was a Java thick client. So probably in like the first meeting where someone mentioned, hey, we should do a Java thick client, I could have said, yeah, no. And then the performance would have been, we're done. This is great.
Write it in C, you'd have been way better.
But now, along those lines, and this is likely a competitor. Do you care if I mention some kind of competitor? Not a direct. I don't know if they're direct competitor.
No, go for it.
So Synopsys, I was doing like a briefing thing with, and they said they had this module. I don't know if it was a browser plugin or whatever, but like as the developer was like Google searching for what libraries to use, they were actually flagging them and saying this could be vulnerable, or this has this certain number of vulnerabilities, and they were giving you telemetry on what the developer was searching for before they even integrated into the code. I called that like shifting left.
Totally agree. And yeah, that's not competitive with us at all. And Synopsys is great. I think that perfectly exemplifies some of the shift left bit of shift left. To me is the vulnerability discover and remediation bit. And obviously, as close as we can put that to the development teams as possible, that's the way we'll actually succeed and scale. And then the parts that shift right are the visibility chunk and the feedback chunk. And so the visibility to me is kind of giving development teams and DevOps teams insight into what's actually happening against their real applications and APIs and services. And the feedback bit is how do real people actually attack those services? So that becomes kind of a combination of bug bounty and pen test.
Sure.
And it's almost like people stopped reading the DevOps handbook halfway through. It's I draw analogies to like the Agile movement, right? It's like, oh, we'll just do Scrum and then we're fine. And it's like, no, there's a lot more to Agile than that, and there's a lot more to DevOps than shifting left. And it makes me wonder if you have any thoughts, Zane, on why it is that so many companies fall short of actually looking at performance monitoring, because that's quite literally like the second and third ways of DevOps, which is continuous feedback and rapid feedback, and continuous learning, which is, hey, we push something into production and we're testing to see if it's actually used, and we're testing to see if it's, it passed our tests, but is it breaking anything in production, right? Do you have any insights into, maybe why some companies stop that movement, or maybe they just don't think about these things because they're too hard? Like why is it that a lot of companies aren't getting the telemetry that they really need?
I think it's just part of the DevOps journey, the cloud journey, the digital transformation, whatever you want to call it, right? All of this is about increasing velocity. And as we're going through this generational change in the way that we create software and a generational change in the way that we deliver software, we're going through a generational change in how we actually protect those applications. And so I don't think it's really a point of, oh, they've looked at this and decided to not do it. I think it's that the world is changing, and folks, every company I talk to is at a different point in that journey, but everybody recognizes that they're going on that journey. And so I think for most organizations, they just haven't actually hit that point yet in the journey there. And so that's really what I see, because I see this as the commonality of everyone who's kind of going through a DevOps shift or a cloud shift and doing it successfully. They're focused on how can we empower the development teams and the DevOps teams to be security self-sufficient. And a big piece of that is giving them capabilities that they can self-consume from the security side.
More of a philosophical question, Keith and Zane. When we look at where DevOps was born out of and we go back to manufacturing, well, what's been some of the history there? Like, it took that industry some time to increase the velocity, which I really like. I think that's really like what we're talking about here, right? Increase the velocity and efficiency of your processes. It took that industry a long time to do that. Is there same parallels, or I also feel like we have different struggles and challenges too that could affect that timeline of adoption?
Yeah. Keith, do you want to go first?
So in my mind, one of the things I think that, depending on the business, Paul, really, it came down to leadership at the end of the day for a lot of those companies that actually managed to transform the way that they did production, right? So sure. I'm thinking back to, and they cite these sort of things in the DevOps handbook, where companies are looking at the reduction of incidents. And by incidents, in this case, it literally means like bodily injury to their employees on the production line. And so what they actually talk about in the DevOps handbook regarding that is, first of all, the idea of introducing what they call tension. Now, that tension is, taking something where it's maybe the process works well today, and then introducing some additional feedback mechanism, or making it a tighter timeline, right? So we produce 10 widgets over an hour. Let's produce 15 widgets over the next hour. What do we have to do to get there, right? And then start holding yourself to those movable goals. Now, I think in security, what that ends up being is first of all, not hoarding your visibility introduces tension by itself. If you suddenly show teams all of the vulnerabilities you detect on a given day, and you block with, Signal Sciences, or maybe your endpoint protection, right? It's one of those situations where suddenly it's, oh yeah, your edge-based WAF missed this, and by the way, that made it through, but was caught by Signal Sciences. Cool. Like, you show that to your development team, and you're like, oh yeah, no, we're fine. We're protected by a WAF, and you're like, yes, you are. But you're actually being attacked right here in your code. And I can tell you, based on that dynamic scan that I ran, that you're actually vulnerable right there in that code. So you should probably do something about it. And so,
yeah, I mean, that's like the equivalent of the manufacturing line being in the immortality bubble on Rick and Morty.
Right, exactly.
Right?
Exactly. It's like, oh yeah, nobody's going to get hurt and nobody dies, and so we're fine until the C-suite or the leadership realizes, oh wait, no, that actually happens.
Yeah, until the immortality bubble bursts and someone gets shot in the head.
Right. Exactly. So, Zane, I don't know if you want to jump in from there. I mean, I imagine, especially with your experience at Etsy as well, talk to us a little bit about like what it was like to introduce tension, and then also maybe some of the ways that people are introducing tension, both in shifting right and shifting left, right? Because I'm sure that there's scanners and stuff on the left-hand side, but you mentioned bug bounties. I think that we were talking a little bit about some other tooling as well earlier on. The shifting right movement in terms of generating that telemetry, whether it's taking servers offline, et cetera. But you had some thoughts on that, so jump in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll see how good a job I can do. We already went from manufacturing to Rick and Morty, so I feel like we did a really good job right there. No, I think from the visibility side and the feedback side, a couple of the really interesting lessons learned for me that seemed completely obvious in retrospect, but honestly, we had to learn these firsthand because it was early days on this. We started investing a lot in security visibility into kind of for a bunch of our different web APIs and web services and web apps and everything like that. And we only brought that visibility to the security team at first. And then it was almost by accident that we had a few different development teams that were meeting with some of our security team over in their area of the office and saw some of that visibility and said, oh, wait, what is that? And I'm like, oh, that's a graph of people looking for SQL injection or command execution or, looking for vulnerabilities in this new API that we launched. And the development team was like, wait a minute, that's our API. We're the ones who launched that. What do you mean people are attacking that? Can I see this? Can I dig into this? And so what we really learned out of that was like, look, the whole power of visibility here is to bring it directly to the end kind of consumer, which is the development teams and the DevOps teams, and give them that capability so that they can see what's going on for their applications or their services that they own. And then you couple that up with feedback where that's going to be a combination. It's kind of the superset of your pen testers, your bug bounty folks, and your real attackers. And you see, okay, given that visibility into what's going on, how can we detect where people are most likely to attack? How can we detect when people actually discover vulnerabilities? How can we make that very difficult for them? And combine all of these things based on real world scenarios and not just kind of the big stack of theoretical bugs that we had. Because for anyone who's worked, AppSec roles, there's no shortage of bugs. Like we're all drowning in bugs. We're all drowning in kind of theoretical data there. But when you go talk to an app team and you're like, look, I need you to fix these 50 bugs. And say, yeah, what's the priority on these? I've got time to fix like 3 of them. Tell me which ones. And so I think we're all able to kind of fix the criticals and the highs. It's the mountain of mediums and lows that no one's ever able to get to and are the most common ways in which we all end up getting owned anyway. And so what we learned out of that was like, hey, we've always just prioritized based on impact, but not likelihood. And so if we can get that visibility, we can see, oh, we assumed people would attack over here in this service, but actually we see 93% of our attacks against this totally other service. So we should actually prioritize in fixing a bunch of mediums there than compared to something else over here. And so it's all of these things kind of make every other part of your security investment more successful if you can do it. Because if you can kind of shift left and make bug fixing easier and bug discovery easier, then you can get visibility into where people are attacking and feedback on that. Now you can better prioritize the bugs to actually fix. And you're no longer having that conversation of, trust me, this is important. Now you have real data to actually back it up.
So with that, I mean, in what ways do you see the feedback loops being made available, right? So is it you give them access to the Splunk instance, you ask for access to their Jira as a security professional, like in what ways are feedback actually happening in your experience in terms of obviously what you guys do at Signal Sciences, right? Like, of course, you're looking for all the attack vectors, but what additional sort of telemetry are you offering to developers that might be useful to them in terms of, hey, I just pushed something into production? Is anything actually happening negative as a result of that?
Totally. I think this is something to kind of set the context for everyone there too. This is a huge challenge I've always had as a CISO in past roles with security controls like kind of legacy WAFs, where it was a magic box that I'd put out there and I'd lose both ways because exactly as you said, the developers would say, oh, well, you've got that magic box out there. Can't that stop everything? And I couldn't give them access to it because it was at this network choke point where I couldn't give access because someone might hit the wrong button and take all of our services down. So I couldn't get visibility out of it. And yet I couldn't actually get coverage over a lot of different things with it. And so this is where, Signal Sciences or Signal Sciences aside, just thinking about this kind of space, what defines modern security tooling for me is security tooling that can actually be directly used by those development teams and DevOps teams. And that can be built very API first, so you can pull it into Splunk or into Jira or into any of the rest of the tool chain that you're actually using. Because nobody needs another security console to remember to check once a week. Like, you want to be able to embed security context and content into the rest of your tool chain.
So to your point, Zane, you're describing why I failed in one of my projects earlier on in my career, and my intentions were good, but it also explains the evolution. So I had a team of Unix systems administrators that were deploying a lot of systems, and I mean, even as they were transitioning to virtual systems, even with racking hardware, they were standing up a lot of new systems and rebuilding systems at a pretty good clip because it's a very talented team. And so my solution, I need to vulnerability scan them. I'm but I'm only I'm one, maybe two security engineers for the entire university. Right. I can't dedicate 20% of my work load every week to just scanning the Unix systems, right? Even though they were really important. So I don't know if you remember Acid and Base, which were they front ends? Those were front ends to Snort, but no, there was a front end for Nessus that let them, and I don't remember what it's called now. So I'm sorry, there was a front end for Nessus, and it was open source. It was PHP, probably had a lot of web app vulnerabilities, which is ironic in this context. And I gave them the console, and I'm you can scan your own systems. But I mean, largely it didn't work for all the reasons that you're saying, because it didn't tie into their workflow. It was something they had to go and do, and when they got the results, it was a Nessus report with 178 different vulnerabilities every time they scanned something. And so that is perfectly clear now.
Yeah, I think it's something that we've all kind of lived. And I think part of pulling it back up to the initial conversation, part of this shift around DevOps, around cloud and increasing visibility, the reason that side of the house has been successful with the DevOps shift is because they took capabilities that were only in the dev world and capabilities that were only in the operations world, and they brought them together, and so that everyone could move faster as a result. And security is really starting to relearn those same lessons, which is we need to bring security context in there as well, so that everyone can have visibility into what's going on from the security perspective and have that inside the tools that they're already using and the workflows that they're already using.
So along those lines, because I worked in vulnerability management, ironically enough, after I worked at the university, right, sometime after, and they still hired me, even though I had that failed effort. But they a whole subcategory in vulnerability management emerged where the risk sense, and NopSec is a recent company that has been in the space that I managed to do a briefing with. Kenna is another one of the players that are helping organizations prioritize their vulnerabilities, also adding in the lens of what other compensating controls do I have, and helping them prioritize. Do we have that for AppSec? I feel like I should know the answer to this question, but I'm going to turn to you, Zane, and Keith, and see if we can uncover this.
I mean, Keith, I'm curious your perspective. From my perspective, we haven't really, right? I think it's kind of to me, it speaks to the fact that historically, AppSec was a low area of risk for the business, and it is completely shifted, right? Risk has gone from the infrastructure and the network layer out to the endpoint and up to the application. And so risk is shifted, but our focus is shifting.
So I would agree with that. In a lot of ways, I mean, we can look back at the recent Apache Threads 2 vulnerability that came out, a few weeks ago, or the one that happened last year. And I think people are starting to realize that their business now literally lives in their website to some degree, and in some cases is the product, right? And so to that end, it's starting to get a lot more attention than we saw, even just a few years ago, just because the seriousness with which these vulnerabilities can impact a business is critical, and there's not a lot of understanding around the vulnerabilities, right? I think that's one of the other things that, even myself, having been doing this for a while now, I feel still surprised by the fact that you mentioned the OWASP top 10 and developers know what it is, but they don't really understand why SQL injection is bad. They don't comprehend what you can do with it, or why cross-site scripting is bad and what you can do with it. I mean, there are many developers that do understand those things, and in some cases, some that don't even have to care because they're using a framework that takes care of a lot of that input validation, output encoding stuff for them. But even still, it's definitely, as Zane has pointed out, it's a shifting mindset where people are starting to realize, oh, wait, we run software or platform as a service, And that has all of our customer data in one database that is accessed by the web application that everybody interfaces with all day. We should probably do something about that. So yeah, it's definitely changing as commerce moves more toward online. I mean, we're seeing malls around the United States, and I'm sure probably in most places in North America at least, that are just empty, right? Because everybody's now selling online, or they're selling on Amazon in this case. So,
but Keith, I want to ask you, 'cause you manage security for development teams, right? When Signal Sciences or other products are reporting, well, I guess they're all bugs. I mean, vulnerabilities are bugs, right? How are you putting those bugs in context to prioritize them? Are there products on the market today that are doing that, or do you have to customize them and integrate them together for multiple products?
There are products for sure. I'm not going to name any names specifically.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, you don't have to.
You know, people can hit me up on Twitter if they want to talk more about it. I'm happy to mention the ones that I've looked at. There are some open source ones. Faraday Sec is one that's used for joint pen testing engagements.
Yeah. For the Infobyte folks, they run Ecto Party, Francisco. Yeah.
So there are tools out there that are free open source for Community Edition. There are ones that are paid. But yeah, a lot of the time, for me especially, like in my life and every day, is if a company offers me one more portal to log into and look at, I just kind of roll my eyes. It's like, no, it must integrate with one of the following tools for me to be able to pull that data into one place, because I'm just not going to log into 20 different portals every day. It's just not going to happen. So yeah, there are some really great tools out there that not only will they allow you to ingest all of your findings from your scanners, from your manual penetration tests, from some of your web application protection, whether that's a WAF or RASP, into one place. But the other nice thing is they'll also deduplicate and then help you prioritize based on the actual site. So for example, if it was Amazon.com versus like AWS, right?
Yeah,
you could say, okay, Amazon.com is a huge part of our business, so that's going to be, anything that comes in is going to be bumped up a level, and it's going to be bumped up an additional level if it comes in from a pen test as opposed to from a dynamic scanning tool, right? False positive opportunities there. So yeah, I mean, they exist. They're slowly starting to appear and get better in the industry and in the marketplace. And so to that end, that is one of the things that I actively look for is integration into data aggregators, right? Whether it's Splunk or Power BI or, all of those other kind of tools like that as well. So Logarithm is another great one. So yeah, you got to be able to do data analytics now, especially in the AppSec space. And then the other weird thing is you got to figure out how to make it available to dev teams. Because Zane, to your point earlier, one of the hard problems you have when you give somebody access to like a Splunk instance is depending on how much access they have, if they munge some of that data in a bad way and the thing goes offline, it's not fun. So you got to be careful about how you share data as well. But the aggregators are a big play.
Can I ask another philosophical question?
Yeah, by all means.
So when we think of application security as it stands today, do either of you or both can chime in on this, right? As we move forward, does security play less and less of a role until such time there really is no dedicated security role in application security, that development and operations and QA are just doing everything without the need or help of a security dedicated role?
I have thoughts on that, but Zane, go ahead and go first.
Sure. I think that's actually a conversation I've had a fair amount recently. And I don't think that security goes away. I think the role of the security team changes drastically. So it used to be a highly centralized team that we tried to just scale out through there. And then everything, the kind of workloads would come to the security team and get done and sent back. Right. So here's a bunch of code to review, take a look at it, and then send it back. I think security starts to decentralize and embed kind of security champions, security business partners, training up folks interested in security, and tries to embed those capabilities into the individual teams as much as possible. And then the centralized security team becomes kind of a shared services organization that tries to share the lessons learned from those individual teams across the organization and provide capabilities that can be used by everybody there, but goes from this kind of highly centralized model to actually embedding the capabilities directly into the teams as much as possible there. So it's going to look different, but security capability still needs to be there inside the organization.
And in the scenario you described, Zane, communication's really important. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
My mind is similar. It depends on the organization, right? Because and you can do this successfully in both ways. There are some companies that have almost like security champions spread out throughout the organization, with embedded within the team. Like they have a true DevSecOps team, right? They've got a security champion, they've got the Scrum Master, they've got all the developers, and they've got some ops folks or people with sysadmin, skill sets. And some companies operate really well at that. Now, when you're operating at scale, on the other hand, what you tend to find is you find things like ops and security still are their own business unit, but those that are doing DevOps successfully have those almost as a service, right? So it's shared resources. So for example, if you have a centralized version control, now you have the ability for security to almost go in and do all of your third-party library scanning right away. You have your ops people who can provide you configurations all in the same place. If you're playing in the same sandbox, the silos or the friction that exists between those teams starts to disappear. You still have dedicated teams per se, but what you find is ops people are more, they know development skills now. They know Python, they know PowerShell, they know Ansible, they know a number of other things. Security people, by the way, probably still need to learn those things if you don't already know Python or Bash or heck JavaScript, right? Like those are some of the things that I think we start to see more of is the world looks more like developers, but developers with different specializations, right? You have developers who specialize in building software, but then you have developers who specialize in security. You have developers that specialize in site reliability engineering. And that's kind of the way that I think the world eventually evolves into is everybody's developing code.
Yeah, and I like both your feedback. I think you're spot on. I think it's almost like a tiered system, right? You may have, like Keith said, developers that their main goal in life is to create and build software, and their expertise goes deep into how to build and engineer software, right? I don't think of myself as a software engineer. I think of myself as a pretty bad programmer, right? And there's a huge difference between that. And then you've got the kind of blended person that's got some engineering and development skills, but also is taking in some of that security context. I think where the security comes in is really being focused on security and digging deep into that. And I'll give you an example. Sven from NetSparker gave an awesome technical segment. I mean, he dug deep into PHP and all the different variable types and how they can be abused. I really don't foresee either of those two development roles, whether it's the hybrid role or shared development role, like taking the time to go research and analyze the impacts of that particular piece of security research, right? I see that as in a security role, even if you're not the Sven who's researching that, someone like a security person like myself would analyze that and then take it to the other teams, the other roles, and say, this is something we need to look out for. Here's what I found. Here's how I've analyzed. Here's how it impacts us. Here's where the priority is, and help those other teams. That's kind of how I see it. And if you haven't seen that technical segment, Zane or Keith, it's just friggin' pretty awesome.
Awesome.
Sven's a smart dude.
Yeah.
Cool. Paul, I don't know if you had any other questions. I still have 5 more questions for Zane, but I don't know if there's anything else you want to jump on first.
Are we looking at time stuff, or do we have time for one more topic?
I think we got. If you want one more topic, I think we're a little bit over, but I mean,
it's our show, right?
Yeah,
right. We get to make the decision. So as long as Zane can stick around. So one of the things that I'm really struggling with, and then I don't think gets enough priority, is this concept of open source software modules and libraries and frameworks inside of your enterprise software. And I really think this represents a lot more risk. I think Equifax was kind of insights as to how that can go horribly wrong. But I think on a day-to-day basis when you're doing development, and this has been fueled by a lot of articles and discussions we've had over the past several weeks, that when I'm building software, I might, to save time, include an open source component or a library. I don't believe we have all of the necessary tools and insights. Sure, there are products and processes that can do that. I don't think we really truly understand the risk, right? Because it could be an open source library that was abandoned, and we don't understand all the vulnerabilities in open source software, whether there's not enough people looking, or whether it's too transient for someone to make a node module and just leave it alone or not get any attention. But that could be something that completely undermines the integrity and security of your application. So how do we deal with this problem moving forward, which I think is probably in the top 3 problems you got to deal with today?
Yeah. I can jump in on that one.
Sure,
I think that's the perfect example of these 3 of a failure of all 3 of these buckets, right? I think it's starting from the going left bit, it's the how do we get capabilities to developers so that they can quickly see the risks of different open source projects or libraries that they're pulling in, known bad ones or ones with known issues or anything there, giving them that feedback to say, hey, you just pulled in a totally deprecated library that has 18 known critical issues, and getting that feedback in a way that's not full of false positives.
Well, and Zane, I'll stop with you for a second. Maybe it has no documented issues. That's my concern, right? It's you can look at just the age, like, hey, this hasn't been updated in a year. Hey, but hey, everything's good because all our software told us that there's no vulnerabilities. And you're like, oh, wait a minute, no one starts to code in a year.
Exactly. And this is, I think, the perfect point to kind of demonstrate those three buckets, right? Is if we're only focused on vulnerability discovery, then the failure case is exactly what you talked about. That if there is no known issue with it, well, we ran a scanner and it's fine. Air quote, fine, right? Now, how do we couple that up with, well, let's get visibility into how people actually attack us. Let's get some effective defense over us that isn't, a big box of regexes and signatures only guarding against known things, but something that we don't have to tune and can actually protect our web apps. And then let's couple that up with feedback that says, hey, security researchers, hey, attackers, let us know, like, you've got ways to report issues that you find or anything there so that we can get feedback about these particular areas. And so, with any good kind of set of controls, you build things assuming the previous one isn't going to work right every time. And so it's a perfect example of not just focusing on bug discovery, but how do we actually focus on visibility and feedback loop to backstop all of this?
Yeah, and to shift it left, I think developers probably need more awareness and training around the threat modeling of, we can threat model around like how an attacker is going to attack us and maybe some known vulnerabilities, but what's the threat model for I've included an open source library and I forgot about it? Or how do I give them criteria for selecting the appropriate open source libraries? What's that criteria look like? And then threat model, well, what if there's a major critical vulnerability in this open source library or framework or module? And then have a plan for when things go wrong as well, right?
I'll give you the perfect example of this. Way back in early Etsy days, this aligns really well, which is there was some WordPress in use for some random stuff, as there is at any enterprise of any scale. Because we had visibility, we saw an interesting spike in folks attacking some of the WordPress stuff. And then we had, because of the feedback loop, and because we had one of the really early bug bounty programs at the time, we had people disclosing WordPress O-Days to us because we had a bug bounty program.
Right.
And at the time, WordPress themselves actually did it. And so because we had those different buckets, we were able to get coverage over a scenario exactly like you're describing. Whereas if we had only kind of invested in one of those or only thought about how do we do static analysis or just look at the libraries in use, we never would have had coverage.
Yeah. No, I think that's and I've been kind of down on the usage of bug bounties in terms of, I think people use them incorrectly oftentimes, but that's a use case where it can really save your butt.
Yeah, totally.
And part of that, Paul, too, I think gets to a couple of things, which is the open source model by itself is a little bit of a problem from a security standpoint because it's a pull, not a push model, right? So you have to be pulling down updates to that library pretty regularly to actually, make use of it. And, to Zane's point about visibility, if you have a centralized version control system, you can at least see what versions people are using of different open source libraries, which is hugely helpful. But on top of that, as a security team, again, as the security team changes in history, eventually what will happen is we're all using the same shared version control. The security team will pull down open source libraries on behalf of the development team because guess what? They also do some code development as well. And then they'll actually be the ones to constantly update and make sure that they're adding, integration or unit testing around that for the different teams, right? So now it's, you want to use this library, let's go down and pull it down. Let's make sure it's vetted. But then also we're going to make it available to you locally, and we'll be the ones responsible for updating those sort of things because hey, you're not going to pay attention to the vulnerabilities that come out in it, but we will. At some point, maybe you set a threshold for deprecation based on age, right? Okay, it's 6 months without an update. We're going to let it go another 6 months, but you teams that are using this, because I can tell based on that centralized version control dependencies, you have to get ready in the next 6 months to move off of this thing. And so your first milepost is next month. I want to know what your plan is to actually move off of this.
Yeah, and I like that because we need to get it on the developer's roadmap early on, because I think there's likely two scenarios that could fix it. One, if it's that important to the organization, you might task your developers, look, you just need to take over this open source project, do a full code review, come up with a new version, and depending on the license, re-release it as open source. And we're just going to own it now because it's so critical to our business. I've seen those scenarios. I'm sure you folks have as well, right? And the other scenario is, well, when we notice a certain age of not updating, maybe it hasn't been updated in 90 days, maybe that's the timer, we go and look to see if someone else has forked it. And maybe we switch to a forked version. Maybe that's got some commercial backing or better support, and we switch to the forked version, which is being updated more regularly, right? And that could be a better, cheaper solution than taking over the maintenance yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we got to discuss that. I think it was worthwhile going over time now because that was awesome.
So just a little bit more time on this segment, by the way, Zane, are you ready for the 5 questions with Application Security Weekly?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So first and foremost, what were the specs like on your first computer?
Oh, so first one I really got to use would have been my parents' IBM AT personal computer. But first one I probably got to really get hands-on with, like swapping out some different bits of hardware and everything like that, would have been a 386, like just kind of a generic 386 that was the family computer that I probably broke a few times.
Nice. So also, what programming language did you learn first? And if you do any coding, what do you enjoy writing in today?
Oh, man. Okay. 3 different languages for those then. First one I ever wrote a program in would have been BASIC, way back when. First one I started actually developing multiple different programs in and everything would have been C, which I shudder to think what that code must have actually looked like. And then the one that I actually enjoy writing in and that I've probably written the most stuff in would be Python. I am certainly not a good software engineer by any stretch of that word, but gotten to write just kind of, fun different tools for different problems that I've had and everything in Python.
Right on. So now to pull you into the holy wars, Vim or Emacs?
Oh, there's no war at all. Of course it's Vim.
There you go.
See, I know as soon as the guest says, there's no holy war, I know what their answer is going to be. Things the Emacs users that have to defend and go on the defense, right?
Oh man, yeah. Honestly, Paul, I think that with all of our guests so far, you're actually pretty spot on with that reaction. So the next one though has been a bit controversial: spaces or tabs?
Just do your Vim RC where one's consistent.
There you go. Right. See, for me, it's tabs as 4 spaces. Call it a day. Right. Like. Oh,
okay. Yeah.
So I kind of.
Yeah, I'll do it tabs as 5 spaces just to throw everyone off. No.
So suddenly you get onto a Python project and they're like, "Uh-oh, Zane's here."
Yeah, exactly. Surprise, nothing works. Yeah.
And lastly,
nothing works because of my coding, not because of my spacing.
Well,
in my case too.
And so the last one, who would you nominate or what topic should we cover on a future episode of Application Security Weekly?
Oh, man. There's a million good folks. The last talk that I just read was Eric Fay, who runs AppSec over at Hulu. Just did an interesting talk. And yeah, he might make for a fun guest on here. Definitely.
Awesome. That'd be great.
I like that suggestion. Yeah, that's cool.
Likewise. So with that, we are going to take a short break and then come back for the news.